right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Amy Jamrog. For those of you who don't know me, I am a financial advisor. I've been practicing for 28 years, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Catherine Wakefield, who is an estate planning and advanced planning attorney with MassMutual. So today we're going to cover an important topic, which is living your legacy by design and tailoring your estate plan specifically for people with children. And we say this because tomorrow we are doing the similar workshop, but planning for people without children. And there are some unique nuances for each of those different circumstances. And so today is, if you're on this call, it's for people with children. Tomorrow is for people without children. And the two of us will be co-leading both. So welcome. Today's session is about building a strong financial plan that preserves both your family's legacy and your retirement. So we're going to share some key elements like tax-efficient wealth transfer strategies. There's a mouthful. Smart asset protection and effective family communication to help secure your children and grandchildren's future without sacrificing your own financial security in your lifetime. This is webinar style, so you've got some anonymity, but if you have questions and you want to unmute and ask your questions, there'll be a chance to do that at the end. If you've got questions as we're presenting, please feel free to type them in the chat. And if we can pause and just answer your questions as we go, we can certainly do that. And then the last thing I will say, as we always say, is sometimes you will have questions that you are not interested in sharing on a recorded call with 100 people. And so if that is the case and there's something that you would really like to talk to me or Catherine about, feel free to email us and we'll put our emails in the chat so you have both of them. But sometimes you've got a burning question and it's personal, we can take that offline for you. All right, so we're going to get right to it and we're going to have Catherine begin with estate planning.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you so much to everyone on the call. It's great to be here with all of you. So one of the things we're looking at with estate planning is, what do you want to actually accomplish? So are you clear about your intentions for your money during your lifetime? What happens if you become incapacitated, and what happens when you pass away? Because at least two of those three things are going to happen to all of us. You're going to live and you're not going to live anymore. So in planning for those, are you sure where you want your money to go? Are you sure how you want your money to pass away? And are you sure what your current documents say, if you have those current documents already completed? So one of the things that can be the most important in reviewing your documents, especially if you have children, as your children age, you may have different wishes for those children. And as your children grow, you'll know a little bit more about how they are with their money, right? When someone is 1, 2, 3 years old, if you did your documents when they're those ages, maybe even up to, let's say, age 10, their personalities as far as money aren't really formed yet, because everything is reliant on you as their parent or you as their guardian. But as they hit 10 to maybe 20, you start to see their personality form. They start to really understand money a little bit better. So your wishes for them may change as they get older. And you may start to think about, how do I want to pass money along in a way that my child is going to handle it the best? Those are things, and those are reasons why you do your own estate plan. So you want to make sure that somebody knows what your intentions are when you pass away. So you may find that you have a personal representative that's your spouse, a partner, a loved one, a friend, sometimes even a corporate personal representative. You want that person to sit down with you. You want to tell them what you're looking to accomplish for the people that you're leaving behind. And sometimes that's an interesting conversation, especially if it is an adult child or someone that you trust with your finances, but maybe you don't want to tell them exactly what your net worth is. That being said, you can have that conversation, sometimes bringing in your advisor or a trusted attorney, CPA, friend, if it makes you feel more comfortable, to share as much as you want to share about your personal finances, but also do it in a thoughtful way where that person can continue to guide your loved ones as you leave money behind. Secondly, you want to make sure that someone knows your intentions if you become incapacitated. So there's a document called a power of attorney. And this is the financial power of attorney that determines who is there to manage your assets if you're sick, if you're hurt, if you're unable for any reason to sign on your own behalf. This person can do this for you, or this group of people, this list of people, whoever you've listed, can do this. They will be able, you want them if you do international travel. You want somebody who can sign if you're just unavailable, can do this on your behalf. This is an important document to have to keep up to date, to make sure you know who this person is, because it may have been something you did 15 or 20 years ago and really haven't looked at since. So knowing who you've listed, making sure it's still who you want. And then lastly, making sure that this document is something that is up to date and current is going to be really important. We want this to make sure that this document works for you when you need it to work. And financial institutions are starting to put a cap on how old these documents can be for them to be considered to be in good order. So worst case would be you to need to use it and for the institution not to consider good because it's too old. So reviewing your document with your advisor every few years is a really good, I would say, best practice. And then knowing for you what your document says as well.
Catherine, can I interrupt you for a sec?
Please, please do.
Can you just speak for a moment to when should you use an attorney to do your estate planning documents versus something more homemade?
Good question. So looking at when you want an attorney to do it, well, one, if you're not an attorney, that's always a good thing, but jokingly a little bit. But in reality, when you're doing your estate planning documents, it's a great question and answer. It's a good give and take between you and the person you're working with on this. If you're working with an attorney, where they may bring up questions that you don't necessarily think of for yourself, or things that you might not have thought you wanted, but a discussion point that attorneys have seen other people do. So having that trusted voice, having somebody there to say, you know what, did you think about this? Or did you think about this? Might make your documents better than they would have been if you do them yourself. Now, on the flip side, it is going to cost you more to work with an attorney to do your estate planning documents. Now, I'm in a role where I don't draft documents anymore. I review them for people that I work with, like Amy, but I don't draft my own. And I'll tell you, it's a lot easier to review them than it is to draft them. So, and it takes a lot longer. So if you want to do them yourself, you can. There's LegalZoom, there's Trust and Will, there's other online services, but you're answering questions when you use those services that are from an AI or from just somebody who creates these questions. Sometimes you may not know why you're answering a question or why they're asking the question, I should say. So you can answer it in a way that's going to get you a document that you don't want because you weren't sure why they were asking the question. So having a live person to work with to go back and forth and ask questions, have them get to know you as they're drafting the documents, it's going to likely create a much better end product than it would be if you do it yourself. So to answer the question, I guess more succinctly than that, long way to answer a short question. Best case scenario is you have an attorney to work with to do it. And if you absolutely decide you don't want to spend the money for an attorney, you can use these other services because it's better than not having the documents. But I would still make sure if I could. And there are ways to get documents done less expensively than hiring a large law firm. So you can find a solo practitioner that depending on the size of your estate, might be perfectly able to draft a simple will and it's going to charge you a third of what a large firm would charge. So it's going to be working with your advisor, and figuring out, how large is my estate? How much money do I have? How complicated do I need to be? And do I really need to pay top dollar for somebody to draft what could be a simple document?
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, great point to bring up. There is one other document that you really want to have that's a living document before we talk about a will, and that's a healthcare proxy. So if you have kids and your kids are under 18, you are determined to be their healthcare proxy. The day that that child turns 18, you lose access to all of their healthcare, their patient portal for an online or their online patient portal for their doctor's office, any healthcare information. If they end up in the emergency room, you'll get the bill, but you won't get the reason why unless they're willing to share it, or you do a healthcare proxy. So right before your child turns 18, you want to fill out a healthcare proxy and have your child sign it, making you able to access their healthcare. This is something that I would say if you're just doing a healthcare proxy, the state of Massachusetts, the state of Connecticut, the state of New York, wherever you're located, almost every state has one. So you can go online, find the state document for your state, download that, and it should be something that your client can or that your child can sign, and maybe you get notarized. That's totally fine for an 18-year-old's healthcare proxy. They probably don't need an attorney to draft that. But if they're doing a whole estate planning package, usually it comes with will, power of attorney, healthcare proxy. So if you're doing it for yourselves, you can have the attorney draft it. If you're doing it for a child, it's probably something that you can use a free online form for, because the hope is that you don't really need it for them and they're just naming you anyway. Unless there's a more complicated situation, in which case talk to Amy or talk to your attorney.
Quick question in the chat from JR. She just said they've moved a number of times and want to keep their estate plan consistent with the state that they're a resident of. She said, if your will or trust, if you're comfortable with your document, can you like kind of copy that through an online service to update it for a new state? Or would you advise take your existing documents and have an attorney do an update to them?
Oh, that's a great question. I would probably have an attorney in the estate, because in your state, at least review them in the state that you've moved to. You don't always need to redo the documents for every single state you're in, especially for your will or a trust. Those very often can stay. There are differences between states for healthcare proxy and for power of attorney, but there are free documents for those on the state website for both POA and healthcare proxy. But I would start with having an attorney review them. They're probably not going to charge you much of anything at all, because they're hoping you'll hire them to do the document review. So getting that looked at to see if there is a state by state difference or whether they're good in your state is going to give you that comfort that you don't need to be worried about it. If you're going from a community property state to a non-community property state, however, there are 8 or 9 states that have a distinction between his or spouse one, spouse two, and their assets, and a non-community property state, which is everything is marital property. So if you're going from community property to non-community property, yes, you absolutely want to have those reviewed, because you're more likely than not going to have to redo the documents there, at least your will, maybe not the healthcare proxy and the power of attorney. So good questions.
Great.
So if we look at a will, what is an ethical will? So what is a will that, a will is a specific document that details where you would like your assets distributed, who you would like them to be distributed to, and who you're putting in charge of that distribution. So what's the difference between a will and an ethical will? So an ethical will is a will plus a letter of intention. This is a will that you've thoughtfully put together either on your own, through one of these legal services, or with an attorney, that's going to define your wishes, define your values, and provide some clear instructions for how you would like your assets to be distributed, and just kind of connect the dots between, all right, I've got my executor here, I've got my trustee here if I have a trust, my beneficiaries are over here. Who is going to be able to understand all of those things and how they fit together? And then with kids, you're going to look at your kids as adults when they're adults. Can any of them serve in the role as an executor? Are any of them financially savvy enough to be the power of attorney? Can any of my kids be a healthcare proxy? If they're over 18, those are great discussion points to have with with your kids, to say, I think I'm going to do this for you. Are you comfortable with that? Can you handle being the personal representative if something were to happen to me as your parent? And not every child is going to feel that they can, and that's okay. But it's better for you to know that. And then also, and I use a bowling analogy, because most of us have been bowling at one point or another in your life, and everybody's got those bumper lines, right? They put up the bumper plates and the lines so that the ball can't go out no matter what you do. And I'll tell you, my kids think that's the best thing ever, because they always knocked out a pin, and they're like, yes. And I'm like, yeah, but if you took away the bumper plates, that doesn't happen. So when you create a will, an ethical will where you're asking for your wishes, you're putting your hopes for your guardian in there for minor children. You're creating those virtual bumper plates for your heirs and for your personal representative. My kids can spend money for this, but they can't spend money for that. Or I've seen somewhere it says they must be a productive member of society to inherit. And that's one that's becoming more and more common. And then you define what makes them a productive member of society to you. It's your definition. It's not a legal definition. It's how you feel. They must have completed college or a trade school or have started a business or be a stay-at-home parent or all of, one of the above, or they must be over a certain age, or, I want this to stay in trust, or if my child were to have a financial issue where they're not good at that point in time, the trustee or my personal rep has the ability to hold the money for a period of time and make my child earn the right to get a distribution. So all of these things you can think about with mental health, substance abuse issues, creditors, divorce. You're protecting your heirs using those bumper plates against all the possible things that could happen. So that's the difference between a basic will, which is just here's who's getting what when, and an ethical will, which truly details how you would like someone to inherit and helps bring your beliefs and your wishes to the next generation.
And that's something that if you work with an attorney and you have an actual will, you can then write that letter of intention separately and have it kind of attached to that document so that you can, it's personal, right? You can take the time, do this on your own, and then just attach it to your document so that your family knows where to find that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, it's great. I mean, I've done this exercise and uh, ironically, I tend to rewrite my letter of intention every time I'm on an airplane. I find it to be a nice quiet place to do that. And it really has you think about who and what you care about the most. And that changes over time. So
Yes.
yeah, and so let's talk about this because your will, your estate plan, would you say every 3 to 5 years you should review it?
I would say yes. When the kids are little, I would say every 5 because that's the stages of, and I've got a 10 and a 12-year-old and 2 little boys. So the stages of life change so much, but I don't think there's enough that changes between 5 and 10 unless I've got other changes in my life. That would mean that I need to review it again, but every 5 years. And then after that, every time there's a major change, a marriage, a birth, a death, a divorce, a change in net worth, that means that my will, based on what I thought last time, might no longer be good enough. I want to look at it again. So I'd say every 5 years or a major life change event would be appropriate.
Great. So let's talk about who or what you care about. And when we're talking about kids, and so we want to think about your intentions when you do an estate plan, right? You're thinking about who would be the guardians for my children if they're minors. How will my assets pass to the people I love? Will my kids get everything, or do you want to think about divvying up your assets in different ways? Maybe there are charitable organizations that you care about. Maybe it's your kids and nieces and nephews. Maybe there are friends, not necessarily relatives, that you want to include in your plan. So I'm just going to share a couple of stories and some personal things that might be helpful as you think about naming beneficiaries. Because you've got an estate plan, but then you also need to coordinate to make sure that the beneficiaries on your actual investment accounts, 401k plan, IRA, life insurance contracts, those also have to be updated so that they're consistent with your estate plan. So it's one thing to say in your will that all of these people will benefit from my estate when I'm no longer here. But if you go back to your 401k, your IRA, your life insurance contracts, and you don't stipulate the same thing over there, you're going to have an inconsistent plan. And what happens is life insurance is a contract, retirement accounts are contracts, and somewhere in the past you named beneficiaries for those that you want to make sure that you go back and take a look at so that they're still consistent with maybe your kids were minors, now they're not. Maybe there was a trust, now there's not. So making sure that there's a coordinated effort between the estate plan that you've done and then the individual accounts and insurance policies you have is an important thing. And an attorney or a financial advisor can, of course, help you with that coordination. But as we're thinking about your kids and being the beneficiary, I want you to think about a couple of special planning considerations. Number one, we always ask our clients, do your kids need to be 100% beneficiary of everything? The answer maybe is yes. but you may have charitable intentions. And I know oftentimes we hear from clients who will say, I'd love to do more for charity when I'm no longer here, but not at the expense of disinheriting my kids. Like, is it possible to do both of these things? And the answer is yes, but it's important to also understand the types of assets that you have and what is taxable and what is not taxable, and how you designate your beneficiaries depending on the kind of money that you're leaving behind in the end. But before we talk about that, I do want to talk about in your lifetime, because we also can build a great gifting strategy in your lifetime. This does not have to be about when you're no longer here and what goes to your adult kids or grandkids. When you think about during your lifetime and you're doing your planning, many times we hear from our clients, why do they have to, get the money when they're in their 60s, when I die? That's kind of a long time from now. I'd much prefer to help them now with a house down payment, with gifting each year to help pay for grandkids' educational expenses. Can I gift now instead of waiting till later, or split it and give a little bit earlier and the rest later? And the answer is probably, if you have a good financial plan set up. So you want to be able to look at what you care about, who you care about, and when you want to impact the people or the organizations. Then we build that into a financial plan and make sure that if you're gifting either on an annual basis or occasionally, that still fits into your plan and doesn't hurt you. So it's wonderful to gift and to be able to be generous in that way, but not at the expense of you running out of money because you gave it away in your lifetime. So we want to create a balance between making sure you are okay in your lifetime and your long-term plan is solid. You're thinking about long-term care expenses in the future and just planning for the expected and unexpected. And then can you also afford to build in gifting, either charitably or to your kids or to both? And that's an important thing to think about strategically. The other is, and Catherine, feel free to jump in, but the other thing to consider is special needs planning. So you may have children or grandchildren who have special needs, where you can't necessarily leave your money outright to them or gift them directly because it could hurt their federal benefits that they might be receiving or have them ineligible for certain things. So there's very specific planning that has to be done for children or adults with special needs. We also are working with a lot of clients who have family members with addiction. So these are people you do not want to leave a significant amount of money to, whether it's gifting in your lifetime or as inheritance, because they could do more harm to themselves than good with that money. So there's specific types of estate planning that you want to put in place to make sure you're protecting the people you love from the money, because it might be more hurtful than helpful for them depending on how it's structured. And then the last piece, just to be real, is you may just have some people in your family who are not very responsible, right? Not all kids are created equally. Not all grandkids are the same. And you might just have a spendthrift. You might have somebody who's just wildly irresponsible with money, and you don't want to leave them a chunk of it because they might buy a Lamborghini, and that would not be your intention for them. You would rather see monthly income coming to them over a long period of time rather than a big lump sum coming to them that they might just blow on a crazy purchase. So knowing your people and knowing what specific kinds of issues and challenges your family has, then being able to convey that to your estate planning attorney and your financial advisor can be really helpful, because we can coordinate a plan to maximize legacy, maximize gifting, but also not hurt the beneficiaries that you're trying to benefit. So I don't know, Catherine, if you want to add anything to that.
I would say when you go through all this planning, it's going to be really important to memorialize that, whatever you've talked about with your advisor, with your attorney, because you need your document to match the financial plan that you're putting together. It can be 100%, going back to my bowling analogy, right? Those bumper lanes, it's exactly what Amy was talking about, protecting people from themselves and protecting people from their inheritance and their potential mistakes. And sometimes you may not even have the grandkids yet, right? You may have kids that are like mine that are under 18, but I want this document to last forever and I don't want to have to keep redoing it. So I'm going to put language in there to my kids and any of their heirs. And I'm going to put all of the potential things that could go wrong in the document now so I can protect against what might happen and not have to continually redo the document to say, oh, this could happen, or oh, there could be an addiction issue, or oh, there could be a special needs. If you tell the attorney that you're working with, let's put everything in. These are the things that I'm worried about happening because I don't know how my kids are going to turn out. I don't have grandkids yet, so I have no idea how they're going to turn out, but they may get money someday. So let's put in all of the potential issues into that document. It's not going to cost you more. It's going to make a longer document, but it's going to help make it better and more clear for the person who has to actually spend the money or be in charge of the money, like your personal representative or even potentially a trustee.
The other thing to think about too is as your kids get older, and I know that some of you on the call, you have adult kids, you might not love the person they decided to marry. And you might now start to be more concerned about keeping your family's money in your bloodline rather than it potentially going 50% to a divorce if one of your kids were to get divorced in the future. So there's also some very specific estate planning that you can do and beneficiary arrangements to protect your family's money for your family. And so if that's a consideration, and I know it's a squirrely kind of conversation to have, but if that's something that you are concerned about, that is certainly something that you might want to update in your estate plan as well. All right, so let's talk about, we alluded to this a little bit, so just a couple more minutes on aligning your goals with your estate plan and your documents, Catherine.
So looking at, and we talked about a little bit, Amy talked a little bit about making sure that your beneficiary designations are the same as your estate planning documents. And it's going to be really important that you do that because the beneficiary designation is actually, because it is a contract, is going to trump a will. So if your will says to my kids outright in equal shares, but for whatever reason you name one child beneficiary of a bank account, that child gets the entire bank account and the kids split everything else. And if you did the same with a house or insurance or investments. So every time you update your will, you want to look at your beneficiary designations. And I told you guys, every time your net worth changes, you look at your will, significant change. But more with the beneficiary designations, it's if you leave a job, if you start a new job, if you get divorced, if you get married, if you have another child. One of the interesting things that was in a lot of older documents that we see as one of the biggest planning mistakes that I tend to see is somebody will say to my children, Braden and Cam, but then you have two more kids after and you didn't update your documents. And if your document doesn't say to my children, Braden, Cameron, and any child born of this marriage, it goes only to the two kids that are named and the other two are effectively disinherited, which unless you intended to do that, most parents would be probably fairly upset about. So you want to make sure that everything seamlessly matches. So it's easy for the personal representative and it's easy for the probate court, who will have a copy of your will in most cases, to be absolutely sure that they know where this money is supposed to go. And that letter of intent from your ethical will can absolutely add to the clarity in that. But we want to make sure that those contracted documents, your insurance, your investments, your bank accounts, anything else that has a beneficiary, is the exact same as what your estate planning docs say. So one of the things you can do is work with your attorney, work with your advisor, and say, you know what, I'm not sure what my documents say. You can work with your advisor to get them reviewed, or go back to the attorney that drafted them and say, can we just talk about the beneficiary section? Can we just look at who's supposed to get this so I make sure I name the beneficiaries on my investments and my insurance and my financial stuff correctly? Especially if you have a trust, that's going to be important because you want to make sure the name of the trust matches the name of the beneficiary that you're putting into that beneficiary designation form when you have it. And you can also look at what's going to be important is consolidating and simplifying. So if you have charitable inclinations, you could say one beneficiary, everything goes to that charitable beneficiary. Or you could set up a donor advised fund, and that donor advised fund then passes through to your kids to continue your good works. And you can leave a note that says, I would like this donor advised fund to be used for the following charities. All of those things can help make sure that your money is spent the way that you want it to. So when it comes down to estate planning, I think one of the most important things is the control factor. Is that this is yours, you built it, you worked for this over your entire lifetime. What you don't want, to Amy's point, is you don't want the kids to blow it on a Lamborghini. Or as I jokingly say, because I always ask my kids, what would you spend it on? My 10-year-old today said he was going to fly himself and 4 friends to Paris to go see Kylian Mbappe play. It was a snooker storm. And I was like, that would be awesome. And I want to go, but that's not what I want you to charter a private jet for with my inheritance dollars that you're getting. So, thinking about that, I'm going to put a lot more restrictions on how they can spend it. And I'm going to set up a trust for myself and my husband where if we both pass away, there is money sitting for my kids and there's restrictions on how they spend it. And there's a trusted adult or a corporate trustee that's there to oversee how they're spending it when they do get it. So it comes down to that need to, and some of you may not have that, right? Some of you may have on the call may have adult children. You're absolutely sure they're going to do everything the right way. And that's awesome. And there's nothing wrong with saying to my kids outright. But for someone who wants to have that extra security to make sure that the money is spent, they want it the way they want it spent, there's also nothing wrong with putting those guidelines in place to make sure your kids are as fiscally responsible as you think they are.
And I'm going to take this a step further because I know many people on the call have adult children. To really be thinking about your own, not just your estate plan, but I just want to speak for a second to end of life care and making sure that your family, your adult kids understand what your wishes are for your end of life. And this will seem like really strange advice, but one of the greatest things that you can do for your adult kids is go with them to pre-plan your funeral. Be super clear about what your intentions are for what that looks like, because it's very, very hard when someone passes away unexpectedly and no one knew what mom or dad's wishes were. And now the family is trying to figure it out during a time that's also really upsetting and they're grieving. The second thing I would say is if you could take it even further than that, and if you are older, to take the time, and I would do this with your adult kids because it can actually be a really wonderful experience, is take the time to put your own obituary together. When you're no longer here and your kids are trying to put something together and they're trying to piece all of the important things of your life together, they're not going to get it all correct. But you know what you want to mention, who you want to acknowledge, what your highlight reel looks like. And when you sit down and do this with your kids, with your adult kids, it's really like a walk down memory lane. And so I would just have you consider putting these important pieces in place because it will save so much time and heartache and perhaps family, strife if you don't do it. So just a couple of additional ideas for you. I definitely want to spend some time on, because this is oftentimes a surprise for people. Not all of your assets are created equal. And as I said before, your kids aren't the same either. And what often happens is parents, let's just use 2 kids for an example. You've got 2 kids, and in your mind, your kids are going to be treated equally and fairly. And in your mind, that might be the same thing. But what you may not be taking into account is your kids' tax brackets. So here's what I mean. I'm going to use an extreme example. Let's just say that you have a son, an adult son who works in a nonprofit and is in the lowest tax bracket. And you have a daughter who's a surgeon who's in the highest tax bracket. And in your plan, you're thinking, let's leave the house 50-50 to the kids, and let's leave the retirement account 50-50 to the kids. Here's the thing that will happen in that plan. A whole bunch of your money will get wasted on taxes. Now, I said, for example, 2 kids, but really it's more like 3 kids. It's your 2 kids, and then the third unintended child is the IRS. So if you were to look closely at each of your kids' personal financial situations, and this takes having to have some transparency, the son who's in the low tax bracket would be a better person to inherit a retirement account, because your IRA, your 401k, for most people is 100% taxable when it gets inherited by the next generation. Spouses can roll it over to each other, but when that money goes to your kids must spend that account within a 10-year period, and it is all ordinary income to them. So if you've got somebody in a very high tax bracket, this is, use $1 million, for example. I inherit $1 million. I have to take it out over 10 years. That's approximately $100,000 a year if I take it evenly. That's $100,000 of additional taxable income on top of my household income. This could be the highest tax rate having to be paid on a retirement account. Whereas if you just reshuffle the beneficiaries a little bit and give the retirement account to, or the majority of the retirement account to the child who's in the low tax bracket, you're going to save 20, 30% of taxes on that account. Home equity, when you leave the home behind to the kids, for the most part, that gets left behind tax-free. So depending on how your estate is structured, if you owned your home and you died and you left it to your kids, the home equity is not taxable as ordinary income. So we're talking about two very different assets and two kids who are in very different tax brackets. And just by shuffling that around a little bit can save hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes to your kids. Here's the other thing to consider. We talked about charitable giving versus giving everything to your kids or grandkids. A retirement account, an IRA, a 401k, if it's all pre-tax money, that account is totally taxable to people, but it is not taxable to charity. So if you wanted to do some charitable planning, either in your lifetime or when you pass, the retirement account is typically one of the best assets to leave to charity because they don't pay taxes on it. So sometimes we see people leaving behind, home equity to charity and the retirement account to their kids, when it really should be the opposite. Leave behind the very taxable thing to an entity that's not going to have to pay any taxes, and leave behind the Roth IRA, the life insurance, the home equity, the assets that are not taxable to your kids. Much, much better asset. In some cases, we've seen where just by a slight tweaking of beneficiaries, you leave behind almost twice as much money because we mitigate the tax issue. So I see lots of questions coming in. So let me just pause for a second just to see if there's anything we need to address. Catherine, you've been.
I think one great question we got was talking about professional executors and trustees versus family members as trustees.
Yep.
And the benefits and drawbacks of having both or having one over the other. And then there was a question on divorce and how do gifts and expected inheritances get managed in a divorce. So I'd say let's look at the professional trustee one first.
Please, yeah, go right ahead.
If that's okay. So the professional trustee, the benefit to the professional trustee is that you don't have the professional trustee will have zero emotional attachment. During a time in your life where your family presumably is going to be extremely upset because they're going through a death in the family. You have somebody whose job it is to do this. They're going to act responsibly, ostensibly responsibly. They're going to be emotionless about it, and they're going to follow law. So that can be a good thing, and that can also be something that's jarring for some people because the question then comes back from the family, well, why would they do that? You don't know them. Nope, but they're following the will. They're following what you've written in your ethical will and your letter of intent, which can upset the family. So to have somebody who is that one step removed, who's been hired to do this as a job, can be great if you have families fighting or if you have children that may not see eye to eye on everything and you don't want to name one child executor and the other child be a beneficiary, because then the question is, why did mom pick them or why did dad pick them over me? And there's a lot of emotional attachment to that because the executor is a very important role. The executor deals with all the finances, or personal representative deals with all the finances, and it can be an emotional blow to a child that they weren't the chosen one. And there's no way the parent can explain it because they're not around to do so. So taking that off of the plate of the family when they're grieving can be a wonderful thing to do, but it also means you have somebody that doesn't know you as the executor. So you really do have to write that really good letter of intent where the executor, who's the professional, doesn't have to interpret your wishes or guests, because they're going to stick with the letter of the law. They might not be quite as lenient as a family member would have. Oh, I know Catherine would have wanted this, or because they can't do that. So sometimes having both a professional and a family member can be a good solution as well. You can have a family member overseeing all of it, but your request is that they hire a professional trustee. So you don't have to pick either or, but if there is a contentious family situation, it's a great idea to have somebody else come in and be that voice of reason and be the one, so you avoid any family, or at least avoid as much family squabbles as you can.
Jane asked an important question, and I want to be really clear about taxes. So we were just talking about when you inherit an IRA versus home equity. An IRA, you're going to have to pay ordinary income tax on that versus home equity where you don't. But there are actually three types of taxes to make sure that we're clear about. The first is income tax, right? Income tax or capital gains taxes. That's its own separate entity, depending on the type of asset you're going to be inheriting. Separate from that, though, is federal estate taxes, which are kind of in flux right now. But currently, if you die owning, each you and your spouse can each own about $14 million worth of stuff. So that means real estate, investments, life insurance, all of it. Everything you own gets added up in the end. And if you're 14 million and 14 million, if you exceed those numbers, then there'll be a federal estate tax to be paid on your estate. A lot of this can, with smart estate planning, can be reduced, if not eliminated. There's a third tax, though, which is the state estate tax. And it depends on the state you live in. There are several states that don't have state estate taxes, but Jane's question was about the Massachusetts state estate tax. So here in Massachusetts, we used to have a $1 million limit. Now it's gone up to $2 million. But if you die in the state of Massachusetts with more than $2 million, what's above the 2 million is going to be taxable. So there, we could have a whole tax webinar, but just be mindful of there's several different types of taxes we're talking about. When it comes to inheriting, I'm just talking about what the individual would be responsible for, which is different than what your estate is going to be responsible for. I want to also mention another thing that came up recently, and Catherine, feel free to add to that in the chat if it's helpful. But I want to mention one other thing when we think about gifts to the family, and this came up this past week with a client. When I said, what are your intentions for your adult kids? And they have a beautiful lake house. And he said, well, above all, we want the lake house to go to the kids, and we want that to always stay in our family. This is true for a lot of families who have property, vacation homes, for example. And what I just want to point out is that oftentimes parents leave behind real estate to their kids to keep it in the family as part of their legacy without realizing the burden that can put on a family. So this particular lake house, for example, would be lovely to leave it to the kids, but the taxes are $24,000 a year, and it's going to need a new roof. And the HOA costs for the lake association is very expensive. So when you think about leaving the quote unquote gift of real estate behind to your family, it's important to also consider attaching to it a fund, some kind of money, whether it's a retirement account, a non-retirement account, or even better, life insurance, that can be a fund to maintain that property so that the burden is not on your kids. Because what often happens is one of the kids can afford it, one of them can't, somebody's in the middle, and somebody wants to be bought out. The family can't sustain it, and it becomes more of a burden and a source of infighting than a gift. And so great planning can resolve this because we can build a fund to sustain the property. But just keep that in mind that a gift is not necessarily a gift for everybody when attached to it is a lot of expense.
And you can also find that, let's answer Tony's question about divorce, because that's a perfect lead into that. Is, if you gift your kids jointly the house and one of them gets divorced, you have the potential for an ex-in-law to now own 25% of the vacation home that you wanted to leave in the family, or maybe get all of it in the divorce and lose 50% of the home. So that's something where you can also work with your advisor as you're planning and maybe set up a trust to own the house and add in the life insurance or set up a fund separately to manage those assets to help with the expenses for the family if you're going to do this and you know it's an expensive proposition. But definitely some good drafting around that as well, if divorce is a potential concern, can help because to Jane's question, what counts in your estate? And it's everything that you own in your name in the state of Massachusetts is your asset. And for Tony's question on divorce, everything that you own that you've inherited or received as a gift, unless it's very clearly kept separate, such as in a trust, could be considered to be an asset in a divorce. So what you leave your kids as well as how you leave it to them could make a huge difference.
And in your lifetime, as you're thinking about gifts to your kids, it's one thing. So the gift limit per person in 2025 is $19,000. So if you are married, you and your spouse can each give each of your kids $19,000 per year. Now, if you can do that, that's a wonderful thing for the kids. But be thinking about what strategically could this look like. So it could be a house down payment, for example. So if you're building a plan to gift your kids for house down payments and you want to stay within that $19,000 gift limit, keep in mind that you and your spouse can gift $36,000 to a child on December 31st and another $36,000 on January 1st in the next calendar year. You can gift a significant amount of money to the kids. They do not have to pay any tax on it. There's no impact to them. And as long as you stay within that $19,000 limit, there's no impact to you either. So if you've got an estate that is worth trying to shrink it down during your lifetime, then gifting is a wonderful way to reduce the size of your estate and either benefit people or benefit charitable organizations. Charitable organizations, there's no $19,000 limit. You can give significantly more than that if it makes sense in your plan. Keep in mind also, we have this situation with a number of clients right now where their older parents have significant assets with a lot of tax impact. Meaning, if I have Apple stock that I bought years and years and years ago, and if I sold my Apple stock, I'd have to pay a significant tax on that. But if I gift some of that Apple stock to my kids and they're in a lower tax bracket, it's possible that by gifting actual stock or funds to your kids, it won't cost you in taxes and they may pay minimal or even zero capital gains tax on the gift of stock or funds. So when we think about in your lifetime, what's your strategy for gifting? It's not necessarily just cash. Oftentimes cash is your best asset to keep. And some of these other things are better to gift and give away or give away charitably. So again, if you're thinking about gifting kids or if you're gifting a lot of cash, there might be a more strategic way for you to be gifting in your lifetime. And that's something that you can work on with your advisor, attorney, and accountant. Anything else, Catherine, on gifting or estate
Thinking the
planning?
same as you, with highly appreciated stock is a great asset to gift to a charity. And for
Yes.
that reason of avoiding paying the taxes on it. The other thing is the only other thing I would add is the gift to the kids doesn't have to be a gift to the kids outright. So I don't have to cut a check or give them the stock outright. I can put it in a trust for my kids and consider that a gift to them as long as the trust is drafted correctly. So if I've got kids I'd like to make the gift to and I'm starting when they're not old enough to have that money outright, I can start making that gift every single year. I don't have to use a 529 plan. I don't have to use a specifically child focused or education focused account. I can do it in such a way that I'm creating an asset pool for them that's not education related if I don't want to, but I can also start saving for them a little bit earlier if I'm in that situation.
A great thing for grandparents to also think about is
Absolutely.
grandparents can gift grandkids, even littles. And over time, if it's built in a trust, they protect it from the kids. But at some point in time, when you hear I inherited a trust from my grandmother. Like, this is how it works. This is how it happens very deliberately over time. That can be a great strategy for passing wealth to the next generation or even the next generation. I do want to point out too, 529 plans you just mentioned. Just in case anybody on the call does not know this, I know that putting money in a 529 educational account for kids or grandchildren is a great idea if they go to school, if they need that money for higher education or for college. And there's often a hesitation for grandparents and parents to perhaps overfund a college account. Like, what if we put too much money in there, or they don't go to college, or they don't need all of it for college? Would that have been a waste? And just to know that in the last year, the IRS now allows for up to $35,000. There's a very specific way you have to do this, but up to $35,000 left in a 529 plan can actually be moved out of the 529 plan and put into a Roth for the recipient. So if your child or grandchild does not need all of the money and there's money left over in the college account, one of the things to consider is starting to move that money out up to 35 grand into a Roth and kickstarting their retirement. That's an incredible way to recycle tax-free money that would have been used for education and now can be used for whatever their future plans are. So that's just a nuance that changed last year in case anybody wasn't aware of that. It makes the 529 funding a little more appealing these days. Other questions that anyone has? Okay.
So Tony's got a question in here about the tax liability to the recipient if they're gifted appreciated stock. So that is a great question. And then step up in cost basis versus the gift. So if you receive a gift that's highly appreciated stock and it's gifted to you during your lifetime, you're going to receive the basis that the giver has. So to Amy's example, right? I bought Apple stock for $1 a share. It's now worth $10 a share. I'm making $11 because I'm going to make my math even easier. So there's a $10 gain built into every share. So if I gift that during my lifetime, that person gets my dollar basis. So when they go to sell it, they're going to have that $10 of gain built in. But if I leave it to somebody at my death, they receive a step up in cost basis, and that $10 of gain effectively gets ignored. So sometimes it makes sense to give them cash versus appreciated stock. But if the parent is in, let's say, a 39% tax bracket and the child is in a 20% tax bracket, the parent may want to keep their cash and give the child the stock because they're in a low enough bracket that they may pay 0 capital gains or 10 or 15% capital gains versus what the parents would have to pay in tax. So we can look at the tax rates of parents versus children and potentially give gifts better that way.
And we just had the situation come up with a grandmother and wanting to gift the grandkids appreciated stock. And the dilemma was, we looked at it and said, okay, you can gift them this very appreciated stock in your lifetime. They're going to have to pay the tax. Or if you wait until you pass, the step up in basis would happen for them and they would pay no tax. And she said, I'd rather them have it now. And so how do we avoid them paying the tax? I said, well, the only other workaround is you sell it, you pay the tax. But in some cases, she would be in a higher tax bracket than some of the grandkids. And she said, you know what, at this stage in my life, I'll pay the tax. I just want the kids to have the money and not have any tax burden at all. So each individual circumstance is different. We can look at that and kind of help you think through what makes the most sense and how does the overall family benefit the most, depending on the way that you gift and the time frame in which you make that gift. All right, we've got a couple of other questions.
Advisor, sorry, I was going to say having an advisor to work with can make such a huge difference because you can sit down as a family and you are a trusted advisor, but you're also that one step removed where you're taking the emotion out of it. And you're saying, let's look at this from a logical standpoint versus, and I just want to gift to my grandkids. Let's think about this and figure out logically how to do it. And okay, so we do have a couple extra different questions in here.
Yep.
The 529 to Roth question is, does it have to be for that specific beneficiary? It can be given to a different child.
So I believe there's a very specific way this has to be done. You can change the beneficiary of a 529 to another child, or you can split the money to another child. So if my son doesn't use his 529 money, could I give some of it to my niece? Yes. First, you have to move it to a new beneficiary, and then that new beneficiary can do the Roth piece of it afterwards. The other question that Cam just asked is there a rule of thumb where you want to put your non-contract assets, so meaning an investment account, for example, that's not a non-retirement account, into a living trust so that it's not subject to probate? Yes, you can do that. You also can do a TOD registration for it, which is the asset's still in your name, but it's registered as transfer on death. And then you name your beneficiaries, and essentially you're creating a contract around what would have been a non-contracted account. But I don't know, Catherine, if you have a thought about probate and
Yeah.
non-qualified money.
So the difference between so if you're putting assets into a living trust, you're still able to spend them for yourself. You're changing the registration of your account. Instead of my checking account being the Catherine checking account, it's now the trust account of Catherine checking account. It's like taking my money and putting it from my left pocket into my right. There's very little difference as far as what I can spend. But where it makes the difference is if I have a will, it's public. It's public knowledge how much I have. It's in a net worth. It goes to the court. It gets filed. Anybody can look at my documents when I pass away. So that can be one. And as a result of that, it can take longer because anybody can challenge it. If Amy said to my personal rep, I should be her beneficiary, they have to stop the whole process, determine whether Amy's claim is valid or not, and it can take a lot longer. And then that money has to sit in the estate account until the probate process is closed. So you could have 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, a year. If it's a really contested account, it could be a few years where you don't want to distribute the money to beneficiaries. So if you want this money to get to your heirs faster and more efficiently, sometimes it makes sense to transfer those assets into a trust because a trust is much harder to challenge than a will. In my example, my silly example where I said Amy's going to challenge my will, she would go to challenge my trust, and my trustee would say, prove that you have the right to make that challenge. The process doesn't just stop. So her claim would fail there, and it would just get ignored and move on. Where a beneficiary of a will, they would actually have to disprove her claim, and it stops the whole process. So it's not so much always that it's not subject to probate, it's how quickly and how efficiently you want your heirs to get those assets. Are you okay with them waiting for the probate process to be done? Do you want to have a living trust? You don't necessarily need to have a lot of net worth, but again, you'd like to have that control factor. You want somebody to help if you're incapacitated. You want somebody to help guide your heirs when you're no longer around. Those are the types and times that you put an asset into a trust. So Cam, I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Yep, perfect timing. She has to hop off for another call. Perfect.
Awesome.
So just a couple final thoughts before we wrap up. I mean, this clearly we could talk for hours about this subject because there are so many different nuances for each person's family. Kids are different, grandkids are different. And so, if this sparked any ideas for you or like, ooh, we really should talk about that, or this would be a great dinner conversation with my spouse tonight, terrific. That was the whole point of spending this time together today. I think, most importantly, make sure that your estate plan reflects your actual wishes. And if it's outdated, old, beyond 5 years, or you have more kids than what you had named in your original documents, it's worth updating them. Do an audit of all of your beneficiaries. Take a look at it. It's a great time of the year to just take a look at all of the accounts you have, insurance policies and investments, and just make sure that the people who are named as beneficiaries make sense. They're still alive. They're people you still like. They're people you're still married to, right? All of these things change over time. But if you don't go back and update your beneficiary and you unexpectedly pass away, we have seen where someone's ex-spouse is the beneficiary of a significant amount of money because they never changed the ex-spouse on a beneficiary form. So these kinds of things are just worth taking the time to clean your plan up and get your ducks in order. And most importantly, as you're thinking about your intentions, as Catherine shared earlier, the benefit of that living, that ethical will, that letter of intention can provide so much clarity and so much peace of mind for your heirs. I think that taking the time to do that can also really clarify for yourself what you care about, what your values are, who you intend to benefit when you're no longer here. And that, of all the legal documents, that one can be the most personal and give the most guidance to the people that you love. So thank you all for being here. Catherine, thank you for your expertise and wisdom. If anyone's interested in showing up tomorrow, there's a whole different conversation called How Do You Do Your Estate Planning When There Are No Children? And a lot of unique opportunities we'll talk about tomorrow. And then if you care about philanthropic giving, we have a whole webinar on philanthropic strategies coming up in October. So you'll get the invitation for that one as well. Again, thanks everyone for being here. Have a great rest of your afternoon. And if you have any personal questions that you don't want to ask today on this call, always feel free to reach out to us. We are always available. Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much for having me, Amy.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.